Story 1. I teach math at college. One semester, I'm teaching a bridge course, where students who have previously done poorly in math are given the opportunity to prove their potential the summer before they will begin proper classes. Basically, if they fail the bridge course, they don't get accepted to college. One student is particularly defiant to the idea of this class. She fails to turn in homework, even when directly asked, and offers no excuse or reason. Eventually, I directly tell her that she will surely fail the class at her current rate. She gets defensive and claims, "I'm a criminal justice major. I'm going to be a police officer. I don't need math. All I need to do is point and shoot." Needless to say, she failed. Math saved a lot of people's lives that day. Story 2. I have told this before, but it fits. I was teaching English at a university in Japan, and I assigned the students the task of translating a Japanese folktale into English and presenting it orally to the class. One young lady chose Momotaro. It's the story of a baby boy that's found when an elderly couple sees a massive peach floating down a river. They retrieve it, cut it open, and find the baby. He then grows up to fight monsters. Momotaro is usually translated as Peach Boy, but this young lady chose to translate it as The Boy Who Came in My Peach. She kept saying it over and over. I nearly died trying not to show any reaction. Story 3. My high school biology class was working on a project. I tend to chat with my class while they're working on things. A student asked, "Mr. X, are you married?" "Yes, for the last 8 years." Another student asks, "Are you a virgin?" Of course, the whole class breaks out in laughter. I said, "I've been married for 8 years. What do you think?" A group of students in that class started calling me Papi Chulo. I had to look it up on Urban Dictionary and let them know it was inappropriate. Story 4. I was teaching a differential calculus class last year and was talking about continuous extensions of functions with holes. I was asking my students, "So this function has a hole at x equals 3. What should we fill this hole with?" A female student of mine said something that sounded so inappropriate, all I could say is, "What?" I thought she had suggested certain male bodily fluid. Turns out she was saying cement, but pronounced it cement. Half my class lost it, and it was really hard not to laugh for the rest of the class. Story 5. Teaching 10 to 12-year-olds is a goldmine of cringy comments I can't pick. I don't think anyone here has had a wet dream yet, do you? Asked by a 5th grader the day they watched the Human Growth and Development video. When a boy bumped into a desk and hit a sensitive spot. "Oh, my balls. Oh, no, I said crumples and goes to the floor. Oh, my balls. Oh, I said it again." If I liked girls, I'd like you. I mean, not that I don't like girls. Well, I don't. Not because I'm gay. Not that gay is bad, but I'm not gay. But I don't like girls. I think because I haven't gotten to puberty yet. Made even better by the long pause between each sentence and the confusion on the poor girl's face. Story 6. I'm not a teacher, but if Mr. V were still around, he'd tell you guys this story. It was my class's first day in 8th grade history class, and Mr. V introduced himself and showed us his right hand, which was missing 2.5 fingers. He told us the story about how he was mowing his lawn and dropped a rag, which got stuck in the blades and the motor. With the motor running, he turned the lawnmower over and tried to pull the rag out. Instead, the rag and his hand was sucked into the blades. His wife called 911 and was told to look for her husband's fingers in the grass. Mr. V's wife claimed that the 911 operator told her that if they found the fingers, they should put them in a glass of milk to preserve them so they could be sewn back on. Turns out that's just for teeth. Anyway, his digits were far too mangled, and thus no preserved fingers. At the end of the story, one of my classmates raised her hand and asked, "Mr. V, so if I get my head chopped off, should I put it in milk?" It was all Mr. V could do to not laugh and just responded, "Yes, Jennifer, if that happens, put your head in milk." Story 7. Not a teacher, but in my sophomore year of high school, I had this gigantic weeaboo girl in some of my classes. Before anyone gets on my ass about using that term, I love anime, but this girl takes it to a weird level. Like the pretending to be a cat and saying random Japanese words out of context levels. Anyways, so I believe we were covering the topic of imperialism in class, and our teacher was lecturing us on the fact. Part of her lecture included a small portion where Japan managed to fight off an attempted invasion by some European country or something. I shit you not. The second this was said out loud, this weeaboo girl jumps right out of her seat, throws her arms up in the air, and cheers. This was met with pure silence as she stood there, arms raised with a huge smile on her face. It couldn't have been silent for more than 10 seconds, but it felt like 1,000 times longer. The pinnacle of it all, though, was the one thing that broke the silence. Out of the back corner of the room came the simple words that everyone in that room was thinking. What the fuck? Story 8. I tried to kill my aunt once. They put me in a mental hospital for a week. Said nonchalantly by one of my fourth graders who had severe psychosis. She didn't come back after spring break because she stabbed her babysitter with a kitchen knife, and that made administration finally take me seriously about her being a danger to other students. Loved that little girl to death, but being in a mainstreamed classroom with 30 kids who did not understand her and a teacher, me, who was not trained to help her with her issues was the last thing she needed. I'm so glad she's in a specialized emotional disturbances class now, with 7 other kids, a teacher who knows what he's doing, and 2 aides to make sure nobody is hurting anybody else or themselves. Story 9. I know I'm late to the discussion, but I think mine might take the cake. When I was in CPR class my freshman year, in a suburb outside of Boston, back before the Red Sox had won their first World Series in 86 years, and Sox fans were rageful and hated the Yankees with more passion than they ever will again. Anyways, class was almost over, and the principal of the school came on the loudspeaker and said, "We have news in out of New York." During his short pause, I yelled out, "New York sucks!" September, getting ready for the playoffs. And then he said, 2 planes have crashed into the Twin Towers. Obviously, I felt horrible and had no idea that was the day that would never be forgotten. I yelled New York sucks during the principal's announcement of 9/11. Story 10. When I was in college, I had this really awesome anthropology professor who was incredibly smart and had a really dry sense of humor. I took 2 classes with him, and in the second one, there was this girl who was incredibly annoying because she was one of those know-it-alls who never shut up. She was always questioning him and what he was teaching, quoting random things she had read in other books, but he would usually brush her off and say, "Well, in a way, yes," and then go into an explanation of all the facts. One day, she had the nerve to try and correct him and told him that he was wrong. He finally had it, and in his typical monotone voice, went on a good 5 to 10 minute explanation as to why she was wrong. It was the most professional and educational way I have ever witnessed someone shutting another person up. By the end, she was visibly embarrassed, and that was the last time she spoke up, unless she had a legit question for the rest of the semester. Story 11. Not a teacher, but my law professor was talking about how illegally obtained evidence can't be used to arrest or convict somebody. In the example, he said if police raid the wrong house and find cocaine, they will take the cocaine but can't issue an arrest warrant for the homeowner. One of the kids raised his hand and asked, "So, could the person go to the police station and ask for their cocaine to be returned?" Story 12. I'm not a teacher, but this is probably one of the most cringeworthy things that I've ever witnessed. My lab partner from my 9th grade year was one of the popular girls. Well, since we had to spend the year together in class, we talked a lot and got somewhat close. Now, the table behind us had one of those typical neckbeards. He was overweight, unkempt, had greasy hair in a ponytail, and oily skin. He was also the type that expected girls to flock to him, and he was crushing hard on the popular girl, but she had a boyfriend, so he never said anything. Well, one day, popular girl comes in crying, so naturally, I ask what's wrong. She tells me that she just found out her boyfriend had cheated on her. As soon as Neckbeard heard those words come out of her mouth, he came to our table and started saying how he'd never mistreat her, how a fine lady like her, his words, deserves a gentleman like him, and how he'll beat the out of her now ex-boyfriend for her. Once he was done professing his love to her, he grabbed her hand and attempted to kiss it. She quickly pulled back her hand, and he started yelling at her, saying things like, "If a gentleman like me can't get to you, what makes you think any other guy will?" And how she's gonna regret turning down a gentleman such as himself. Story 13. I have seen a student drop a bowling ball onto his iPhone. This was the physics classroom of a tenured teacher who loved to put assorted heavy objects in the room. A bowling ball was not the strangest thing there, to prove how strong his OtterBox was around it. He said he had seen a truck drive over it without harm, so the bowling ball would be nothing. Needless to say, the phone shattered into hundreds of pieces, and the teacher laughed in his face before explaining to him how momentum and impulse worked. Story 14. Was a middle school substitute teacher for a year. Tried to make the joke about April showers bringing May flowers, but what do Mayflowers bring? Pilgrims. Got complete silence. A student then blurts out, "No, Miss D, the Mayflower was the ship that got bombed in Pearl Harbor." Another time, I was showing a black and white photo of the Berlin Wall and asked the class what was in the photo. One kid immediately responded with 50 Shades of Grey. Story 15. This'll get buried, but still wanted to share. I teach mostly freshman biology. First day of school, someone mentions Jurassic World, and I jokingly say that Jurassic World is based on my life. A girl sitting up front has a horrified look on her face and loudly asks, "So your whole family died?" I just gave her a blank stare. Story 16. We were discussing a prose poem where a woman who had a double mastectomy lost her lover because he was disgusted by her body, and she leaves a bowl of dead bees on his porch. Q, an MRA type, had made a lot of comments about feminist poetry thus far, so it was confirmed, not me circle jerking. And he said, "She needs to deal with the fact that no one will ever be attracted to a cancer survivor." Our teacher was a cancer survivor. Story 17. Not a teacher. Some girl known for her lack of smarts asked to go to the bathroom. This was 11th grade. The teacher was a fantastic guy, but liked to mess with students. So she gets up and goes over to the desk to fill out the pass. She asks the teacher if she can use her phone to fill in the time section. Thus, teacher would confiscate phones if he saw them, no excuses. He says no and points to the analog clock on the wall and says, "There's a clock right there." She whispers something to the teacher, to which he says, "Louder, what?" She says, "I don't know how to read a non-digital clock." Teacher got this eating grin and said she couldn't use the bathroom until she got the proper time from the wall clock. She never lived that down and never learned how to read the clocks. Story 18. I was one of the students involved in this one. I had a fantastic English teacher in high school, and he went above and beyond to inspire and assist his students that were academically inclined, which usually pissed off the students that weren't. One of those things were voluntary extra credit mini assignments, usually a short presentation or skit on something interesting. One of my favorites was the one where we got to pick any word we wanted and explain to the class where it came from and how it evolved. I chose defenestration and explained all about the defenestration of Prague and the penchant for throwing things or people that annoy you out of the window. Most of the class was enjoying it, and our teacher, who did his best to give us credit that we were actually people who knew stuff about things, made a pun. "I bet Bill Gates wishes he could do that." Some of the class giggled, but this one girl who sat right in the back, who hated anything that even hinted at trying in class and was really, really dumb, rolled her eyes and, like we were wasting her time, said, "What does Bill Gates have to do with Windows?" The teacher confided in me at the end of class that it was the hardest he'd ever tried to not laugh at a student. Story 19. I have brown hair and wear dark-rimmed glasses. I was teaching English in Southeast Asia, and one of my less advanced, 1 or 2 kids out of 60 could speak English, classes was passing around a piece of paper rolled up, colored all black except for the white tip. Eventually, I grabbed it and told them to stop playing games. They all laughed and made another one. Except this time they started twirling it around and saying what appeared to be Latin or gibberish phrases. Once again, I grabbed it. Only this time, one of the students pulled up an image on his cell phone. Mother-f***ing Harry Potter. The kids were calling me Harry Potter for a good 30 minutes, saying spells and pointing at me and laughing. I thought they were laughing because they were enjoying the games I was trying to play with them. I drank a lot that day. Story 20. In 11th grade, we took a field trip to Fort Snelling. One guy in my class was bored and started goofing off. So when the tour guide asked us, "What do you think the soldiers did to pass time?" he screamed out, "Played with their monkeys." The tour guy looked confused and said, "No, they played cards." Later, we got to walk around and check stuff out. I returned to the teacher in time to hear the tour guide say, "It's so nice of you to bring a kid like that. They can be disruptive, but should be treated just like the other kids." Story 21. I was teaching English in Japan and had a new student. This middle-aged student came into the room, Hesitantly, she sat down, grabbing onto her handbag for dear life, and stared at me like I was a creature in a zoo for 1 hour. She said absolutely nothing for 1 hour. So I explained in great detail how to make lasagna, including the sauces and handmade pasta. She came back every week for 3 months, said nothing, just looked at me in horror. I ran out of recipes and told the school that she was wasting my time and her money. Story 22. So I was student teaching at a California middle school. I teach music, and my master teacher informed me that I would be teaching the general music class for the second semester. The first day, I was going over ancient music and talking about instruments that are common for many cultures. This intelligent kid in the back goes, "Hasn't China had the bong for a long time?" I pause and say, "What?" He repeats himself, "Hasn't China had the bong for a long time?" My master teacher is silently laughing his ass off, and I'm there with a deer in the headlights face. Finally, the kid says, "You know, it's big and metal and you hit it." I responded with, "Gong. You meant gong." Yes, China is famous for some of their applications of metallurgy. My master teacher says, "Everyone forget that word you heard," and I move on with the lesson. Oh, it was amazing. Story 23. In high school history class, we saw a video about the integration of Little Rock High School. When being summarized at the end, she said, "The state police blocked their entry, and the president sent in the National Guard to escort the students." When asked if she meant 101st Airborne and National Guard, she said, "Yeah, state police, National Guard, same thing." Oh, you said from a student. That was my teacher. Story 24. Also not a teacher, but this was legendary. We were on the bus, and there were about 25 kids, sophomore years of high school. Don't ask me how, but we got on the subject of periods. The whole bus would usually talk every ride, and our bus group was kind of a clique. And a girl cracked a joke about wearing their red shorts, where out of nowhere, a boy in my class enthusiastically pipes up and says, "Yeah, right, period blood is blue." Apparently, all the commercials with the liquid going on a pad made him actually think that period blood would be blue. Needless to say, the entire bus erupted in laughter, and the poor kid started crying. It was actually pretty sad. All of the girls ended up consoling him the rest of the ride. To this day, when I think about it, I cringe so hard it hurts. I will never forget as his face crumbled and he muttered quietly, "But I thought it was blue." Story 25. My shoes are expired. No shit. In the middle of math class, this girl yells that out. After a moment of silence, I stopped, put down my pen, and turned off the overhead. I asked what she meant. She again told me that her shoes were expired. I asked her what she meant again. She pointed to the date stamp on the sole of her shoe and said it was expired. I explained, with a perfectly straight face, that it was the manufacture date. In turn, she said, "You don't know what you're talking about. I ain't wearing no expired shoes." The next day, she came in with a new pair of expensive shoes on. I asked what happened to her other ones, which, by the way, were also relatively new and in good condition, and she said she threw them away. I regret to this day not asking her to check the expiration date on those shoes. I was afraid her head would explode, and I'd have to do a bunch of paperwork. Story 26. I'm not a teacher, but I must share. In high school senior government class, we were required to present one current event topic and give a 5-minute presentation on it. One girl talked about outsourcing tech jobs to India. She talked about the Indian companies building factories in New Delhi for millions of people to work in. Afterward, she asked if there were any questions, and a girl in the class raised her hand to ask, "Wait, how do you fit 1 million people into a deli? I'm confused." Everyone laughed and got so rowdy that the class couldn't even be resumed. We were let go early. Story 1. Two kids were dealing, let's just say, stuff out of their lockers. One had a locker upstairs and the other's locker was downstairs. Everyone who bought it knew the combinations. People were told which locker had their merch, and when you had class on that floor, you'd get a hall pass and stop by the locker. A teacher got suspicious of seeing multiple kids going to the same locker. I will never forget being in class and getting the lockdown announcement while narcotic dogs were brought in, and seeing one of the kids flying down the hallway toward his locker. Story 2. Very weird kid in my year at the time came into school with huge amounts of hairspray in his hair. the amount where your hair eventually sticks like gel, but without actually using any. Guy that sat behind him in one of our classes happened to be one of the worst behaved kids in the school, and he proceeded to get out his lighter and light his hair on fire. It did not go up like if it were oil, but it definitely stayed alight long enough to see him running out the door with his hair smoking. Both kids were gone after that. Story 3. Dude smuggled a wine bottle. How did teachers find out? Well, the brass knuckles he was carrying in the backpack broke the bottle and spilled wine in the middle of the classroom. I guess this is why you only commit one crime at a time. Story 4. He stole a butcher knife from the cafeteria kitchen and attacked a teacher with it. They tried to subdue him and someone pulled the fire alarm. We all evacuated the building. In the ensuing scuffle with the principal, he dropped the butcher knife, but grabbed all the plastic knives and forks from the cafeteria. He ran outside to where we were standing and threw them at us. Since they were cheap plastic, nobody got hurt. He was eventually tackled by the gym teacher and principal, then carted away in an ambulance. Kid never came back to school. The school also decided that banning plastic knives and forks would prevent this incident from happening again, so they replaced all plastic silverware with sporks, which is the real tragedy. Kid did get the mental help he needed, and has gone on to be a productive member of society. Story 5. I came back after a 2-week holiday, I'd missed the last day before we broke up for Christmas, to discover that a person in my friendship group had been catfished for nudes by this guy in the year above, who had then posted them on social media. We took a hockey stick to the school library on the last day of term, destroyed his laptop, and broke his jaw and collarbone. Got expelled pretty quickly after that, but the kid who posted the photos got no repercussions. Story 6. Kid sprayed bear spray all over the boys' bathroom. It spread through the halls, and more than 20 to 30 people got it in their eyes and mouth and had trouble breathing, including some of my best friends, who had to go home because they couldn't breathe. Story 7. Oof, this is a good one. One of the teachers in my high school was born without his right arm from elbow down. He was the new English teacher, pretty young and good-looking. We also had another new female teacher come in that year, who was quite attractive. If you've ever heard of the movie Teeth, it's about this girl with teeth in her that likes to eat things or whatever. Anyway, some kid photoshopped both of their faces onto the movie poster and made it say, "Mr. Blank didn't always have one arm." The picture got around pretty fast, and I went to Catholic school, and this was a big no-no. The kid was super smart too. What a shame. Story 8. In the canyons near our housing, there were lots of old World War II ordnance from when it was a proving ground. Lots of people collected the mostly harmless dummy ordnance. However, some kids found a mortar round and blew it up while they were playing catch with it. 2 of the 3 kids died. So the alarm went off to turn in whatever you had. They found some really impressive collections. So the fire department and Army EOD came to our school to show us some examples of what we could come across. As we sat in the bleachers of the gym, this kid stood up, holding what appeared to be a shiny aluminum softball, and asked if it was anything. The EOD guys froze, and we all had to evacuate. Turned out to be from a cluster bomb. Never saw that kid again. Story 9. When I was in middle school, around age 13, there was a girl in the class sending threatening emails with rather serious threats to all the popular girls. It ended up escalating to where the FBI was involved, and turns out one of the popular girls herself who was targeted was the one sending the messages. This was the late 90s, so don't think she even bothered to cover her tracks, and just used her home computer. Her decomposing body was found in the river 10 years later. Looking back on it all, I'm pretty sure she had undiagnosed mental problems that were starting to surface, and was one of those people who never managed to get them under control. Story 10. I'm from the Midwest. This was the mid-90s. A middle schooler went bird hunting over the weekend. He still had shotgun shells in his coat jacket on Monday. No weapon, just the shells. When he got to school, he realized the shells were there, and immediately turned them in to the principal. He was suspended from classes until the board made their decision, and he was eventually expelled. Kid made an honest mistake, did the right thing to correct the mistake, and was punished to the maximum for it. Story 11. He crushed a canister of pepper spray with pliers until it exploded. They evacuated the entire school and shut down that wing of the school for 3 days until the city and school district cleared it for safe use. If I remember correctly, it hospitalized one student for a few days and earned the guy some juvenile time and hefty fines. That area of the school smelled like old fish and bleach for weeks afterwards. Story 12. My friend left his BB gun and pocket knife in his backpack by accident. The police did a random search of certain classrooms that day, and his room was picked. Quite frankly, when I found out, I was not surprised that he was expelled. What I was surprised about was that he didn't get expelled for marijuana possession or setting off fireworks in the middle of the amphitheater. On the latter, I was disappointed. Story 13. A kid and his friend egged the school from an airplane. It was crazy. The one guy's dad had a Cessna or something with a private strip in the middle of a field. One night, they went to the egg farm next door, stole a bunch of eggs, then took off in the airplane in the middle of the night. Apparently, they did manage to drop eggs around the school. But early in the morning, the fog set in, and they could not find their way back to the landing strip. They ended up flying very low around town. Post 9/11 freaked everybody out. One of the hotels was even evacuated. Eventually, they were arrested and expelled from our school for it, but I think it took authorities a while to figure out what happened. Story 14. Well, technically this doesn't count because they were never caught, even though the police were called in to investigate. But this is some next level stuff. So we have classrooms called temporary classrooms. I don't know if you have them in other countries, but it's small separate classrooms that were made out of a dense type of drywall. So during our official test period, they store all the tests in one classroom. So these tests have been marked, but not revised, and have therefore not gone through admin yet. So Monday we come back to school, and during assembly with the entire school, which we had every day, our headmaster is pissed. He's genuinely a nice guy, but at this moment he's bright red and shivering with anger. Apparently, a student snuck into the school and put a fire hose through a cracked window and flooded the entire classroom. A teacher later told us that the tests were literally adrift in the water. The classroom sustained a crap load of water damage as well, and after no one came forward, the police started a vandalism investigation. All the appliances in the class were also ruined, and some of the files of the teacher, to whom the class belonged, got damaged, and she had to do everything over. They never found the culprits, and used some of our assignment marks for the subjects which tests got completely destroyed. Also, our disciplinary teacher lived in a house and joined the school. He has sheep. Every year, a group of students carry on the tradition of painting the school's roof and painting his sheep and letting them onto the school grounds. Each year, they get suspended for a week. A group of guys also put silicone into the key slots in all the doors. The silicone dried overnight, and we weren't able to get into our classrooms. They had to remove the doors completely. We got the whole morning off, and he got suspended for a while, but left a legend. Story 15. This kid wasn't expelled, but I genuinely do not see why he wasn't. 7th grade in Sweden. Casual class for those who need extra time for Swedish/English. In the middle of the class, he pulls out a revolver replica, which looked insanely real, and points it up at the ceiling. He was sitting further behind than most everyone, so the first one to notice it was the teacher. The expression on his face was something along the lines of, "What the F?" while the kid was smirking. That day was the first day I had ever seen that teacher walk that fast over to confiscate it. Nonetheless, I was scared for a second, because that kid wasn't really someone you could think good of when you'd see a revolver in his hand, you know? Thankfully, he wasn't there to shoot us up, because that would not have been fun. Thanks for not killing us. Story 16. At lunchtime, one kid managed to sneak inside the school library and made all the computers go onto an adult site. Shortly after that, they wore a white mask and took out a water gun, threatening to shoot if people don't bow down to him. Story 17. When I was in 3rd grade, some kid got expelled for bringing knives to school for protection. He was a bit of a hothead. He never used them on anyone, but all the kids knew he had one on him at all times. When he got caught a few weeks into it, his parents were called in, and apparently they were trying to justify the kid having the knives at school. Most kids never saw the kid after he went to the office that one day. Story 18. She was pissed that she had to move schools, so she set her new one on fire, snuck out of the school during lunch with some matches, and set one of the trees in the nearby bushland on fire, which spread to the science block and then to the English block. Firefighters were called, and we evacuated and got sent to the gym. She didn't even try to hide it. She bragged about it until one student eventually dobbed her in, and then she was gone. Story 19. I went to a Catholic school, and a 7th grader brought and did all kinds of narcotics, including the typical, like weed, alcohol, tobacco, and other more nasty stuff. He was expelled and had to go to a school in another county, which is a really bad school. I was dating a girl who lived next to him, and he and I became very good friends. I'm a bit older than him, but he's a mature kid. He's like the little brother I never had. He does a lot of stuff that pisses me off, but I keep him out of trouble for the most part. Not everyone who gets expelled are bad people. They're often misunderstood, and that leads them to make bad decisions. Story 20. There were 2 kids, best friends. Kid 1. We had this little nature center in my high school, and it had a little pond with a bunch of fish. Well, Kid 1 decided it would be super cool to jump in and fish out, no pun intended, as many fish as he could get. Gut them. He liked to carry around a pocket knife for safety reasons and throw them at the students and teacher one day. I only know this because one of my friends was there and wanted to put it in the school's newspaper but was denied to do so. Kid 2. To be honest, I thought it was kind of funny, but totally F-boy material at the same time. Anyways, we had a photography class at school, and were only allowed to take the very expensive cameras out of the classroom to take pictures when we had assignments. So Kid 2 ended up taking said camera home. Not sure how, because our teacher would count every camera before the class let out for the day. And when he got home, he took a bunch of dick pics with the expensive camera, and when he got to class the next day, thought it would be a good idea to download and print the dick pics on the class computer. Apparently, he only wanted to sneak the pictures into his crush's backpack. But somehow, he left the camera drive in the computer, and the teacher found his dick pics and not only told the principal but showed her as well. Dude was expelled that very day, only a week or so after his best friend. Pretty sure his crush didn't receive the dick pics either. Story 21. Our football field in high school had a big sign behind the home bleachers that said, "Go Tigers, beat the," insert opposing team. And before homecoming, I switched it to, "Go Tigers, beat the meat." It got pulled down before the game and homecoming court was announced and all that. And there were only maybe several hundred people that saw it, so it wasn't hugely successful. But 30 plus years later, people are still talking about it. Only suspended for 3 days, and like 1 month of cafeteria duty wiping down tables and stuff. But I only did like 3 days of that, so the juice was totally worth a squeeze. Story 22. Back in 6th grade, there was a kid who I will call John. Now, John, I think, had some undiagnosed psychiatric issues that would cause him to just explode in frustration, but he was otherwise a nice kid. We both had a science teacher who was just an insufferable asshole. He would make it a habit to antagonize and mock kids who he didn't like. Well, one day, during some downtime, John was asking the teacher for help with something. The teacher said something rude like, "There isn't enough time in this life to help you." John obviously freaks out, yanks the asshole teacher's personal iMac G3, it was blue, off the desk, and throws it out of the 3rd-story window to crash against the pavement. Effing karma, man. Story 23. Semi-castrated the principal with his boot. At least, that was the rumor. Kid was best friends with my brother, and he confirms the story. Kid had a bit of an aggression issue, and what we today would recognize as some sort of ADHD type of disorder. But this was in the late 80s, so nobody had thought that it might be a disorder and not just a lack of a good beating. Kid rode his bike in the hallways in grade 8 or 9. The principal saw this and kindly asked the kid if he would be so kind as to not do that, by yanking the kid off of the bike. Kid responded by applying his right foot to the principal's gonads, foobarring one testicle, to the point where it had to be amputated. When I went to the same school a couple of years later, the principal was still there, but he was quite docile. Story 24. 2 years ago, a lesbian couple was nominated for the Homecoming King and Queen Court, and they won it. Everyone was really happy for them, except a few major assholes. At my high school, it's tradition for seniors to have their own parking space, and they get to paint their parking space and make it custom. It's really cool. So, right after the homecoming football game, the pieces of shit went out to their parking spaces and vandalized them, taking spray paint and painting swastikas on their parking spaces, and writing ugly dykes on one of them. They were expelled less than a week later. Story 25. This didn't happen at my school, but it happened to one of my friends. He got expelled from public school because he switched the pills of a bunch of students with candy when he was in the nurse's office by himself. One of the kids in question was basically a real-life version of Fregley from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. This happened on the day of a big school assembly, and the kid had such a sugar rush that he ran out onto the stage as the day he was born, screaming, "I am the Emperor of France!" There were cameras in the nurse's office, so they instantly found out it was him, then promptly expelled him. Story 26. This kid, 18 years of age, opened the window, leaned over, pulled a lighter out of his pocket, and lit a bird nest that was just sitting there on fire. For no reason, apparently. Smoke started getting into the building. Everyone panicked because the janitors just kept saying there was a fire in a classroom, and we rushed outside. It turned out to be nothing serious, but that was not the wisest decision. Story 27. Pre-explanation. All the teachers in my middle school got a Bluetooth speaker of their choice provided by the school so they could play work music. So one kid in my class, let's call him Joe, connected his phone to all the teachers' speakers in every class and played an adult video on it at full volume, and in the last period of the day, the teacher he had got one that said what just connected to the speaker. So before the video started playing, the speaker said, "Joe's phone has connected." Story 28. In second grade, I was line leader, and that morning the school was having electrical issues with the lighting. When we got to the end of the hallway, I stopped, but people kept going, and I was pushed into the fire alarm. Apparently, you can push or pull, and I went shoulder first into the alarm. Basically, the school was evacuated, and the fire department showed up. I thought I was safe when a teacher said there was scheduled evacuation that day, but after the fire department showed up, my first grade teacher said that I did it. There's no way she could have known or seen from her room. Long story short, I got in school suspension before they decided to 86 me. Story 29. Some kid asked to go to the bathroom. Little did the teacher know he would hop up on the toilet, remove the ceiling tile, and climb up in there. He crawled his way through until he reached another bathroom. No idea how he was caught, but his explanation as to why he did it was because the soap dispenser was empty. Story 30. In middle school, there was a mystery afoot. Someone was taking crap and smearing a trail 20 to 30 feet long on the corridor walls. It was pretty revolting, and continued on for at least a month or so. This Jack the Ripper-style manhunt was on, and finally they caught the culprit. It was the kid who was known for smelling terrible, who was shortly after expelled. Not exactly a Sherlock Holmes masterpiece of deduction, but at least the hallways didn't smell like crap, and you didn't feel like you needed a biohazard suit anymore.